temporary basis, such as a mother present in the U.S. on a student, work, or tourist visa. A really tortured definition and description of who he intended this executive order to impact. Every court which has looked at this executive order has found it to be unconstitutional and unenforceable. The executive order has been enjoined by 4 different judges appointed by Presidents Reagan, Bush, Obama, and Biden. 2 circuits have agreed to keep the executive order enjoined, and now implementation is pending before the Supreme Court. You know, right-wing extremists have repeatedly failed to convince the public or Congress to end birthright citizenship through legal means, so now they're trying to cheer on from the sidelines as the president tries to change the Constitution without the American people's consent. So I would offer this amendment. It is straight up preventing the use of taxpayer funds to enforce an unconstitutional executive order, and I would yield back.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment by Ms. Scanlon? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
I'd ask for a
Ms.
recorded vote.
Scanlon asked for a recorded vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman?
Mr. Norman? No.
Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? Mrs. Houchin? No. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Aye. Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger-Fernandez? Ms. Ledger-Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Ms. Scanlon,
Chair?
you're recognized.
I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make in order amendment number 238 offered by Minority Whip Clark, which strikes the section that defunds Planned Parenthood and would reduce access to life-saving cancer screenings and reproductive health care. This bill includes a provision that directly blocks Medicaid patients from receiving care at Planned Parenthood, the nation's largest provider of reproductive health services. Of course, we all know that Medicaid is already not allowed to cover abortions, so this provision is a clear attack on women and their health care writ large. I urge a yes vote on my amendment, and I yield back.
Thank you. You've heard the amendment offered by Ms. Scanlon. Is there any further discussion?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Ms. Ledger-Fernandez, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. I just want to point out that one of the concerns that the Democrats have is that throughout this bill, there is a constant attack on women's health care. I'll be offering an amendment later about the manager's amendment, but, you know, to not fund the place where women get health care, cancer screenings, pap smears, mammograms, basic care that women need, and Planned Parenthood is often the only place they can get it, especially in rural areas. I would urge you to think about the women in your districts and their need for health care and prioritize that. And for that reason, I support this amendment.
Thank you. You've heard the amendment from Ms. Scanlon. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the
I'd ask
noes
for a
have it.
recorded vote.
Ms. Scanlon requests a recorded vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? Mrs. Houchin? No. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Aye. Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger-Fernandez? Ms. Ledger-Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Ms. Scanlon, you're recognized.
Thank you. I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make in order amendment number 411 offered by myself, which strikes section 42106, which repeals and rescinds funds to address air pollution in schools. I yield back.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the vote is on the motion by Ms. Scanlon. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
No.
No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Ms. Scanlon requests a recorded vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern? Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez? Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Ms. Scanlon, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make in order amendment number 71 offered by Representative Raskin, which prevents Title VII from taking effect until the Attorney General certifies that any grant administered by the Office of Justice Programs of the Department of Justice that was terminated after January 20th, 2025 has been reinstated. Last month, President Trump's Department of Justice abruptly cut hundreds of millions of dollars in grant funding that had previously been awarded to support law enforcement, crime prevention, and public safety programs across the country. Despite broad bipartisan support for these grant programs administered by the Department of Justice Office of Justice Programs and President Trump's repeated promises to the American people that he would prioritize public safety, support victims of crime, and address the opioid crisis, his own Department of Justice abruptly informed more than 300 OJP grantees that their work, quote, no longer effectuated the program goals or agency priorities and does not align with this administration's priorities, end quote. Organizations in at least 37 states across the country lost funding, red states and blue states and urban, suburban, and rural areas, and the work of those organizations, which benefits jurisdictions all across our country, would help ensure that all citizens have access to effective systems of safety and justice, regardless of where they live. The terminated grants totaling an estimated $500 million provided federal support for violence reduction, policing and prosecution, victim services, juvenile justice and child protection, substance use and mental health treatment, corrections and reentry, justice system enhancements, research and evaluation, and other state and local level public safety functions. During the House Judiciary Committee's consideration of the reconciliation bill on April 30th, Ranking Member Raskin and committee Democrats tried to restore that funding. Our Republican colleagues rejected it, but cutting funding for these vital programs threatens public safety, harms victims and survivors of violent crime, and hinders crime prevention efforts. So I urge a yes vote on the amendment, and I yield back.
You've heard the motion by Ms. Scanlon. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Ms. Scanlon requests a roll call. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern? Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez? Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Ms. Scanlon, you're recognized.
Thank you. I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make in order amendment number 35, offered by Representative Jayapal, which prohibits the use of funds in Subtitle A of Title VII from being used by Immigration and Customs Enforcement to detain or deport U.S. citizens. The amendment is straightforward. It should be uncontroversial. It would ensure that none of the funds in this bill are used to detain U.S. citizens for immigration enforcement. Reports of U.S. citizens being wrongfully arrested and detained started coming out just days after this administration was sworn in. Some citizens have been detained for merely speaking Spanish. Others were held for days despite consistently telling the Department of Homeland Security that they were citizens. ICE detention of U.S. citizens because of reckless and lawless immigration enforcement is both unconstitutional and dangerous. Even ICE acknowledges that it has no authority to arrest and detain U.S. citizens. Their internal guidance says, as a matter of law, ICE cannot assert its civil immigration enforcement authority to arrest or detain a U.S. citizen. Nevertheless, we've seen detentions of U.S. citizens occur. We've heard about deportation of children, U.S. citizens. So Congress has a duty to act. We have to ensure that government funding, taxpayer dollars, doesn't support illegal or unconstitutional actions. Therefore, I offer this amendment and urge a yes vote. I yield back.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no? No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Ms. Scanlon requests a recorded vote.
Mrs.
Clerk
Fishbach?
will call the vote.
Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? Mrs. Houchin? Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Aye. Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez?
Aye.
Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 7 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Mr. Neguse, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had one amendment that I had planned to introduce. The necessity for that amendment has been obviated, but I wonder if I might be recognized for a minute just to explain why, and then I'll hand it off to Ms. Ledger Fernandez. I had intended to offer an amendment with respect to the provision in two provisions within the bill that would have overturned resource management plans in Colorado, and secondly, the land conveyance issue that we had discussed at great length earlier today. Both of those provisions were removed from the underlying bill. And so I want to thank Representative Zinke, who was very adamant in building a coalition necessary to make the case about removing those provisions. I also want to thank Representative Lee, Representative Horsford, and Representative Titus, each of whom were also, as you know, Madam Chair, from their testimony today, very engaged in making the case that this is not a precedent that the committee should adopt. I'm happy to thank Mr. Langworthy as well. I don't know if my Chautauqua references perhaps played a role in that, but in event, I'm sure that put it right over the top, but in any event. So I am glad that that provision is no longer in this larger bill, and so I will not pursue the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Neguse. Are there any further amendments? Ms. Ledger Fernandez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to offer my first amendment, where I move the committee to add a self-executed second-degree amendment to the manager's amendment, striking the assertion of a new section 44202, which is on page 14 of your manager's amendment, because this would result in at least 300,000 people losing health care coverage. And more importantly, this is the Republicans' attempt to have a national abortion ban. This is their attempt to have a national abortion ban because it would eliminate abortion coverage for marketplace plans or prohibit cost-sharing reduction for plans that maintain abortion coverage. So what you're basically doing is saying if anybody is getting their health coverage through the marketplace, you are putting a disincentive on there so they will not be able to provide abortion. It's a very sneaky amendment in the manager's amendment, but I think we all need to call it out, and so that's why it's the first amendment I am bringing, because that is in effect what it does. And I think that we heard today from Whip Clark about the difficulty of getting reproductive health care. And this is extraordinary in what it would do. And I shared my own personal story, which, given the kind of health care I was undergoing, could have resulted in what might have been considered an abortion, despite the fact that I was just trying to save my life. So these are the kinds of unintended consequences, but this is a very intentional consequence of what's in this bill. And so I urge that Americans understand what's happening here, and that women understand what's happening there in this bill. And it's at the last minute. What, we got it, a couple of hours ago, and they're going to vote on it in a few hours, they've promised us.
Thank you, Ms. Leisure-Fernandez. You've heard the motion by Ms. Leisure-Fernandez. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez requests a recorded vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? Mrs. Houchin? Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack? No. Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Aye. Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez?
Aye.
Ms. Leisure-Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 7 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Are there
Madam
further
Chair.
amendments? Ms. Leisure-Fernandez, you're
Madam Chair, I have amendment to the rule. I move the committee make and order amendment number 47, which is offered by Representative Sykes. Representative Sykes appeared before us and made an impassioned claim as to why we needed to protect Medicaid. And we have heard those on the day say, but this is not really cutting Medicaid. Well, this amendment is your chance to actually vote consistent with some of those statements. So, Madam Chair, I urge a yes vote so that we can actually have a debate on the floor on Representative Sykes' amendment. And I yield back.
You've heard the motion by Ms. Leisure-Fernandez. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Roll call vote, please.
Ms. Leisure-Fernandez requests a roll call vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? Mrs. Houchin? Mr. Langworthy? Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack? No. Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern? Yes. Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Aye. Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez?
Aye.
Ms. Leisure-Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to.
Madam
Any
Chair.
further amendments? Ms. Leisure-Fernandez, you're
Madam Chair, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 485 offered by Representative Beyer, which strikes the elimination of the electricity investment protection tax credits in order to keep electricity prices low. This reconciliation bill amounts to a full repeal of the clean energy tax credits Democrats established through Inflation Reduction Act. But the thing is, this is a way of lowering costs for American families. According to the Department of Energy, in just the last 10 years, costs have declined significantly for many technologies, including distributed solar, down 26%, land-based wind, down 41%, utility-scale solar, down 73%. What other kind of energy is going down in these kinds of degrees? So the Inflation Reduction Act, the renewable energy, the clean energy that Americans want, it is also saving Americans money. In fact, in New Mexico, where, as you know, I've explained, we also are a fossil fuel producing state, We're developing clean energy power plants, manufacturing facilities. We're creating jobs. We're lowering costs. People want us to keep doing this. But Republicans want to go back in time. You know, I feel like we're in the 19th century and Republicans are arguing that gas lamps are better than electric light bulbs and Gesundheit and God bless, Madam Chair. So when Republicans talk about energy dominance, why are they giving up on the energy of the future? If we want to be truly energy dominant and compete in what is expected to be, listen to this, a $2 trillion global clean energy market. If you do not keep these credits in existence, you are basically saying, China, take it all. You lead the world. Well, I don't think we should do that. We have the resources here. Let's vote in favor of the amendment, or at least let our members decide whether they should keep it. With that, Madam Chair, I urge a yes vote and yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Leisure-Fernandez. You've heard the motion from Ms. Leisure-Fernandez. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Noes have it. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez requests a recorded vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? Mrs. Houchin? No. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse?
Aye.
Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez?
Aye.
Ms. Leisure-Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to.
Madam Chair,
Ms. Leisure-Fernandez.
I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 483 offered by myself, which protects state budgets in education and healthcare funding from reductions in oil and gas revenues. So basically, what we did in the House Natural Resources is we reduced oil and gas royalty rates. Now, the problem is oil and gas producing states share in the federal royalty rates. So for those states who have federal lands, they're going to be receiving less royalties. And let's look at how this happened. Act 1, Trump promised to scrap climate laws and to do what oil and gas wanted if U.S. oil bosses donated $1 billion to the Trump campaign. Act number 2, Trump starts living up to that promise. He takes aim at city and state climate laws in an executive order. And now act number 3, cuts to oil and gas royalty rates in the budget reconciliation. And they are going to reduce the money flowing to states. And, you know, my colleague across the aisle pointed out that New Mexico does receive oil and gas, but what this would do, and our land commissioner, whose job it is to try to make sure we get as much money off of those oil and gas leases, wrote us a letter in House Natural Resources pointing out that this would be almost a almost a $500 billion hit to our state because of what we will be doing here. So on behalf of my state, of Colorado, of North Dakota, of all of those other states that have oil and gas producing, I urge a yes vote on my amendment, and I yield back.
You've heard the amendment from Ms. Leisure-Fernandez. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The
A
noes
recorded
have it.
vote.
Ms. Leisure-Fernandez requests a recorded vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? Mrs. Houchin? No. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse?
Aye.
Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez?
Aye.
Ms. Leisure-Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to.
Madam Chair, I would offer as my last amendment, there are so many issues that we heard about today that deserve to have a vote on the floor. The amendments, there used to be a time when I remember we would show up and there'd be votes. You'd have to make decisions. But what happens in rules now is there's never any more amendments. They're all closed rules. But this one I think is really key, and I'm going to offer it as my last amendment because this actually goes to the fact that when we look at that chart that shows that working families, low-income families are going to, they're going to basically, they're going to get a tax hike in essence. They're going to lose out under this bill. But we could change that. We could change that if we struck Section 11004, the extension of the increased child tax credit, and replaced it with H.R. 27633, the American Family Act. And what this would do, this would put the full child tax credit, fully refundable, in the bill. If we care about lifting children out of poverty, making sure that families get to decide, and not only that, making sure that those who earn less get the full child tax credit so that it's not just the wealthy who are getting the full child tax credit. It makes a lot of sense. And, you know, this is one of those things where you guys just put Trump on the baby bonds. We should have put Biden on the child tax credit that we passed, right? But that's the thing, is we just believe in making a difference for people, not plastering names all over the place. But it was good law when we had it, when the Democrats passed it, and it existed in Biden. We should bring it back. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back. And before I yield back, though,
I have one more amendment.
oh, you're going to do an amendment? Okay. In that case, I yield back.
Thank you. Oh, question on your amendment. Yes. I didn't think you made it. You made an amendment. Right. Thank you. Yes. Okay. All those in favor of Ms. Ledger Fernandez' amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
You want a roll call? Roll call.
Ms. Ledger Fernandez requests a roll call. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman?
Mr. Norman? No.
Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Aye. Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez? Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the tally.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Mr. McGovern, you recognize.
Madam Chair, I just have another amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 2 offered by Representative Gillen, which strikes the limitation on the state and local tax deduction. But before we vote on this last amendment, I just want to recap some of what just happened here tonight. So Republicans on this committee voted against raising taxes on billionaires, voted against following a House rule that requires a 3/5 vote to raise income taxes, you know, just in case this great, beautiful bill of theirs raises taxes on regular working people, which I think we all believe it does. But they're insulating themselves by basically waiving the 3/5 requirement. And Republicans voted against protecting Medicaid benefits. They voted against protecting SNAP benefits for children. So I guess more children will have to go hungry. And they voted against an amendment to restore NIH funding for critical cancer research and other important medical research. And I think this is all shameful. So these votes basically show us where your priorities and your values are. And as I said at 1 o'clock in the morning, when you vote for this, you own it. And so with that, Madam Chair, I urge a yes vote on my amendment. Urge you to call the question.
Okay. You've heard the motion by Mr. McGovern. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes
And
have it.
ask for a roll call?
Mr. McGovern requests a roll call vote. Clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? Mrs. Houchin? No. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Aye. Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez? Aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Hearing no further discussion, the question is on the motion from the gentlewoman from Indiana. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to.
Ask for a roll call.
Mr. McGovern requests a roll call. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach?
Yes.
Mrs. Fishbach, aye. Mr. Norman? Mr. Norman, aye. Mr. Roy? Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin, aye. Mr. Langworthy? Mr. Langworthy, aye. Mr. Scott? Mr. Scott, aye. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith, aye. Mr. Jack?
Aye.
Mr. Jack, aye. Mr. McGovern?
Hell no.
Mr. McGovern, no. Ms. Scanlon?
No.
Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Neguse? No. Mr. Neguse, no. Ms. Ledger Fernandez? Ms. Ledger Fernandez, no. Madam Chair?
Aye.
Madam Chair, aye.
The clerk will report the total.
8 yeas, 4 nays.
The ayes have it. The motion to report is agreed to. Accordingly, the gentlewoman from Indiana, Ms. Houchin, will be managing this rule for the majority.
And I will for the minority. Can I ask just one question? What is the schedule?
We will be going to the
Yeah.
floor
You gotta do it, right?
right now.
Are we doing just the rule tonight, or are we doing the rule and the bill tonight?
I am not clear, but I believe there's a chance we'll do the bill tonight.
All right.
Okay? So,
Aren't you glad we started at 1 o'clock?
without, usually about 20 minutes. 20, 30 minutes usually. Right. Right. Without objection, the committee is adjourned.
Ability to establish or enforce state laws that help keep up with the technological evolutions of AI, as well as push back on deliberate designs that could harm Americans. Under this ban, state and local governments won't be able to enforce current, new, or updated regulations around AI use in the workplace, in procurement, guidelines, or in eliminating biases, even regulations that only impact their specific locality. As a former state legislator, I believe we can and should learn from the states and champion solutions that protect Americans, especially workers and children, from harmful AI systems and not put unnecessary stoppages on their progress. Regardless of where you are on AI policy, enacting this moratorium is bad practice. AI has shown tremendous potential to improve and enhance our lives, but if we do not take immediate action to address the threats it poses on consumers as they arise today, we will not be prepared to address the threats that could arise over the next 10 years as a result. I'd like to submit a letter for the record. This letter to Speaker Johnson was signed by over 100 organizations, such as Unidos US, the National Immigration Law Center, National Women's Law Center, and SEIU, in opposition to this provision that's tucked into this bill. In their letter to the Speaker, the organizations state that as we have seen during other periods of rapid technological advancement, like the Industrial Revolution, the creation of the automobile, protecting people from being harmed by new technologies, including holding companies accountable when they cause harm, will spur innovation and the adoption of new technologies. The Republican moratorium on AI will block new innovation from occurring. AI policy touches every aspect of American lives now, and most certainly will over in the next 10 years. Thank you for considering my amendment. I urge its adoption, and I look forward to answering any questions.
And what was the date on the letter?
May 19th, 2025.
And without objection, so ordered. I now recognize Mr. Goldman of New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here to introduce two amendments, but I want to say just a couple things about the broader bill before I get to them. And most of what I'm about to say is really directed at blatantly false statements that many of my Republican colleagues have said, are saying, and likely will say about this bill. First, this bill slashes Medicaid, cuts Medicaid. More than 8 million Americans will lose their health care because of this bill. You can sugarcoat it all you want with eligibility and work requirements and any waste, fraud, and abuse, but the reality is that that's dressing up a pig, and it is cutting Medicaid. Second, the bill increases taxes for the poorest Americans and dramatically reduces taxes for the wealthiest. If you make less than $51,000 a year, your taxes will go up $700. If you make more than $4.3 million a year, which is the top 0.1% of Americans, your taxes will go down by nearly $400,000. That is reducing taxes for the wealthy and increasing taxes for the poor. Third, this bill repeals tax credits for American energy production that has resulted in hundreds of thousands of jobs created in this country and hundreds of billions of dollars of investment in American manufacturing. The vast majority of both of those are in red districts. These credits also reduce energy prices and increase our energy independence. Two things that the America First gang endlessly talk about. And yet, this bill cuts all of that progress. And finally, you will hear my Republican colleagues say that cuts to essential government programs are needed to reduce an exploding deficit. That's nonsense. This bill increases the deficit by at least $3 trillion. So much so that Moody's became the last of the three major ratings agencies to downgrade U.S. debt. Now, this deficit increase will increase annual interest payments on our debt to 9% of total GDP in 10 years. 9%. That is just unsustainable. And yet it is the Republicans who are jamming this through. Now, my amendments address two separate things. One is a very simple amendment that I was shocked did not receive unanimous support in the Judiciary Committee, Amendment 258. It simply says that no federal funding can be used to deport American citizens. Remarkably, every Republican in the Judiciary Committee voted against it, and I hope this committee does not. My second amendment, Amendment 135, addresses what is truly a cruel and cynical attempt to make America hungry again. This bill does not trim SNAP around the edges. It does not cut waste, fraud, and abuse. It cuts SNAP to its core, to the tune of approximately $250 billion, which may sound like an abstract number, but there are human lives at stake. There are children who will go hungry. There are seniors who have to choose between prescription drugs and food. There are working parents who rely on that few $100s a month to put food on their table. My amendment would strike one of the most damaging provisions of this bill, a provision that would shift 75% of the administrative costs onto the states, up from current 50% split. In my district in New York City, more than 118,000 of my constituents use SNAP to put food on the table. And across New York State, 1 in 7 residents depend on it. This bill wouldn't just cut the benefits, it would starve the program. The GOP's proposed changes to SNAP would create a new burden on New York State of over $2.1 billion. And let's be real, what happens when administrative costs shoot up like that? The states can't backfill that amount of money. It's just not feasible. So what happens, of course, is benefits are cut. It's incredibly cynical because you will hear Republicans, and New York Republicans in particular, my colleagues, who have nearly as many SNAP beneficiaries as I do, and they will say, oh, well, it's just putting it on the local officials, on the state. But make no mistake, it increases administrative costs, which is just cutting benefits by another name. This program averages $6 per person per day. And the work requirements that we hear so much about would actually cause 300,000 New Yorkers to lose some or all of their SNAP benefits. That is what this bill is doing, and my amendment would fix that. I urge the committee to support it and rule it in order.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Moskowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment today would prohibit the executive branch from using federal funds to eliminate FEMA, transfer its responsibilities to another agency, or reduce its staffing or funding in a way that impairs its ability to fulfill its statutory functions unless expressly authorized by Congress. In fact, my amendment today just says again what's in the Stafford Act and what's in the Homeland Security Act, which was passed after Katrina. The president was right that FEMA needs reform. Let me say this again. The president was right that FEMA needs reform, as the chairwoman knows from her experiences in North Carolina after Hurricane Helene. But the Secretary of Homeland Security is dead wrong that FEMA should be deleted. First of all, the Secretary is in violation right now of the Stafford Act and in violation of the Homeland Security Act. The Secretary has no ability to pause all grants, which she has done. She has no ability to transfer any of the appropriations or restructure FEMA as she's done. Both of those are in direct violation of the Stafford Act and the Homeland Security Act that was passed after Katrina. So grants are paused. What does that mean, that all grants are paused? That means states right now that are going into hurricane season don't know whether or not they're going to get a declaration, which this administration is holding back. What happens if you don't get a declaration? Just go ask the governor of Arkansas, Governor Huckabee, who worked for the president. It took her weeks to get a declaration. You can't move, you can't respond, you can't spend money because you don't know that you're going to get reimbursed. Fiscally constrained cities and counties don't make decisions. It's analysis paralysis. It's actually in direct contradiction with what we're trying to do. We're trying to speed up FEMA. We're trying to make it faster, right? Which is why I have a bill with Byron Donalds to get FEMA out of Homeland Security. Homeland is disabusing FEMA. They're using FEMA to do grants for the other 22 agencies. That's why we got to get FEMA away from Homeland Security. They're not paying vendors. You know what happens when we don't pay vendors? They can't pay subcontractors. They're not going to be ready to perform in hurricane season. They fired 30% or got them to retire of the workforce in FEMA. Most of the senior people with that experience. You've got regional offices in FEMA now that are half empty. By the way, remember that DOGE, remember the E at the end of DOGE, the word efficiency? Nothing at FEMA has been made more efficient. In fact, I would tell you that the Secretary of Homeland Security has turned FEMA into the Newark airport, okay? It is going to fail this summer. And so look, there's no doubt that FEMA needed reform, but what they've done at Homeland is they've taken something that needed help and they broke it further. Do you know what happens if there's no FEMA to the state that the Speaker represents or Steve Scalise represents? Louisiana goes bankrupt without FEMA when there's a hurricane that comes in from the Gulf of Mexico or the Gulf of America, comes right into Louisiana. They're bankrupt. Alabama's bankrupt. Mississippi's bankrupt. You get an F5, F4 tornado in Tornado Alley. Those states go bankrupt without FEMA. And yet, I don't see my Republican colleagues calling out the administration on how we're going to save FEMA and reform it. Let me say this. I think the Secretary of Homeland Security has exposed the president in significant ways. And I'm not in the business of protecting the president, but I am in the business of protecting the American people and the country. I don't think the president is aware of the current condition of FEMA and its potential inability to perform. We may get lucky, and hopefully we do. Hopefully we don't have a bad hurricane this season. Hopefully we don't have some unforeseen disaster like an earthquake that hasn't happened since the 90s. Lord knows we had a 1 in 100-year pandemic in the first term of the Trump administration. Hopefully we don't have anything like that, because they have decimated FEMA in ways that we won't know until it happens. And listen, I know the chairwoman represents an area that didn't have the best experience after Helene. There's no question about that. There's dramatic improvement that needs to be done at FEMA. But I'm deeply concerned what's happened at Homeland, and I don't think the president is aware the current condition that the secretary has put him and the men and women that work there and the states that are going to go to FEMA and rely on them to help them in their time of need. And those resources are going to come slower. Think about it. You don't get to move your logistics. You don't get to move your water, your ice, your power generation, any of your stuff. And let me remind you, I did this for a living. For a Republican governor, I worked for Ron DeSantis for 2.5 years, took my political hat off. So I'm not giving you partisan coverage. I'm giving you the current state of affairs in an agency that has been absolutely destroyed. And with that, Madam Chairwoman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Moskowitz. Ms. Morrison, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ranking Member McGovern. My amendment today is simple. Before the House advances the largest Medicaid cut in program history, Congress needs to review how this bill will impact hospitals and Americans' access to services. My amendment simply says that the bill cannot take effect until an independent study confirms that these proposed Medicaid cuts will not result in hospital closures or reductions in service, including obstetric services. The Medicaid policies in this bill will strip healthcare coverage from millions of Americans and put essential labor and delivery services on the chopping block. Our country is already facing a worsening maternal health crisis and carelessly ripping away women's access to care without any consideration, and it's just plain cruel. We're already dead last in maternal mortality compared to our peer nations, and instead of putting forward a bill that will actually improve women's health and support moms and babies, my Republican colleagues have chosen to gut the program that covers more than 50% of births in many areas of Minnesota. Having cared for women and their babies for over 20 years as an OBGYN, I am appalled by how callously members of this chamber have turned their backs on their constituents. In my home state of Minnesota, 1.4 million Minnesotans get healthcare coverage through Medicaid, and millions more depend on the hospitals and providers who have been unequivocally clear that the Medicaid cuts in this bill will decimate their ability to provide care. Unequivocally clear that the cuts will force them to reduce services or shut down entirely. And the reality is, if hospitals are unable to keep their lights on and deliver care, we will all pay the price. People will not be able to access care. People will have more medical debt and they will be less healthy. People will suffer. People will die. I would encourage my Republican colleagues to believe the words of the hospitals that serve their constituents, the patients that live in their districts, and analysis after analysis that confirms that these cuts will cost millions of Americans their access to care. So my Republican colleagues who hold majority rule of this chamber, let's be very clear here. You can stop this right now. You can stop the hospital closures. You can stop the cuts to services. You can stop 14 million Americans from losing access to health insurance. You can stop the worsening of the maternal health care crisis and rural hospital crisis. You have the power. You can stop this. More than a dozen of our Republican colleagues here in the House have spoken out and said they cannot support deep cuts to Medicaid. Other Republicans have called these massive cuts morally wrong. And more than a dozen state legislators from my home state of Minnesota wrote our Republican delegation and the president making a very clear case about how this would be a disaster and begged them not to go through with these cuts. I have a copy with me here, Madam Chair, and I request consent for this letter to be entered into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to highlight just a couple of their points. The Minnesota Republican legislators wrote, and I quote, "Too deep of a cut is unmanageable in any instance. Massive Medicaid reductions could punish Minnesota for being such a strong leader in greater efficiencies and better outcomes. Drastic reductions to Medicaid funding have the potential to impact the 1.4 million people we serve and place incredible pressure on our overall state budget." And they closed with, "Please remind our good leaders in Washington that simply cutting the budget is not going to take away our responsibilities to the aged, those with disabilities, mental health needs, children, and the poor," end quote. So to my Republican colleagues, please hear the pleas of your state counterparts as you consider this bill today. I also have with me here a letter from Minnesota's nonprofit hospitals, and Madam Chair, I would request consent for this letter to be entered into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to highlight just a couple of their points. They wrote, and I quote, "Any reduction in federal support would trigger immediate consequences. Patients will lose access, hospitals will be forced to reduce services and will face impossible choices. And communities across our state will feel the effects whether they are covered by Medicaid or not. We know these are difficult budget discussions, but cutting Medicaid doesn't erase the need for care. It simply shifts the burden to states, to hospitals, and ultimately to the very people the program is meant to protect," end quote. Their pleas are clear, their threats are real, the facts are undeniable. So please, on behalf of all Americans, I implore you to do the right thing, rule this amendment in order, and stop these cuts. I yield, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Fishbach, do you have any questions? Mr. McGovern?
Again, I want to thank all of you for your patience and for being here, and you remind all of us of the fact that the underlying bill, the reconciliation bill, is a lousy piece of legislation. I mean, the attacks on health care, attacks on food assistance, the attacks on public lands, the attacks on FEMA, the attacks, and the indifference on AI, which is a very dangerous thing that we're about to do. I mean, basically saying we're not going to do our job in the Congress, but we're going to prevent states from doing anything to protect the citizens. I mean, just so many things. I mean, this bill should not be coming to the floor. Your amendments are all good, and we're going to, make the case that they should be made in order when we get to the point of actually reporting out a rule. But again, I think it is so important that you stayed here and that you made the case as to how we could improve the bill. Did you have? Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to add something that I know is near and dear to your heart because you're such a leader on food insecurity and it's done such incredible work. These so-called work requirements are such a fig leaf. They're such a pretext when in reality, the census data shows that 82% of households with working age adults who do not live with minor children and did not receive disability benefits had earnings during the year 2023. Right, yeah. This is not an issue that needs to be addressed. It is an issue that is being created so that poor Americans can struggle even more.
Yeah. Again, we had this discussion in the Ag Committee. I mean, of a single mother with a 7-year-old child, who loses her job, and she has 90 days to get another job. Otherwise, she loses her benefit. And the back and forth in the Ag Committee was like, well, the 7 years old, the child at school. I mean, like, do people realize what time school gets out? I mean, if people are working, I mean, what happens during the summer? What happens during vacations? I mean, again, many people are able to juggle all this stuff. And the majority of people who are able-bodied, who are on SNAP, actually do work. And there are work requirements, especially for those who are able-bodied adults without dependents. But to be totally indifferent to what life is like for a single parent with a 7 or 8 or 9-year-old child, and to just say, oh, one glove fits all, it's just a cruel and rotten thing to do. And we're talking about food assistance and a really, meager food benefit. On average, $2 per person per meal. And by the way, with the state cost share, that requirement now, many states won't be able to meet that cost share, and so that $2 benefit will get even less. I mean, you can't buy a cup of coffee in the Capitol for $2. And it's like this is where you're going to try to get money to offset tax cuts for billionaires? Like, who does this? I mean, who thought this brilliant idea up? I mean, it's just such a terrible thing to do. I mean, there are other things we can do to improve programs. Every program can be improved. But this is not it. And I appreciate your amendment. I appreciate all your amendments and look forward to working with you. I yield back.
Thank you. I just, again, wanted to, we'll just wave at this point. I want to thank you all for your amendments and for sticking around so long. Representative Lofgren, I really appreciated your bringing attention to the fact that when cuts are made to scientific research, medical research, it doesn't just harm that research. And of course, we've heard about ovarian cancer trials being paused, people not being able to get treatment that they were hoping would impact their issues. But we then know there's job loss when that happens. We're hearing from universities in my district that students who thought they had internships, which would make them the researchers of tomorrow, are losing those internships. And then we're hearing from contractors and tradespeople that universities, in order to try to preserve some of the research, are diverting funding from capital projects. And then we have contractors losing those jobs and tradespeople being laid off because those things are happening. And Rep. Houlihan, we have so many veterans in southeastern Pennsylvania. I think you and I, we each have about 28,000 veterans in our districts. You've got the Coatesville facility in your district. The Philadelphia VA is adjacent to my district. And of course, we've just tried to expand the benefits available to our veterans through the PACT Act. And at the same time that we're trying to expand those benefits and make sure that people actually get the treatment that they are entitled to, that they've earned through their service, we're seeing these funding cuts and the pulling back. So thank you for amendments bringing attention to all of that and everything that people have put forward. Excuse me, losing my voice. I yield back.
Could I just address
Thank you,
the science issue briefly? Because we've seen reductions in physics, in mathematics, in chemistry, in computer science, and what we've seen all across the United States is universities reducing the number of doctoral students that they are admitting because they cannot see how to pay for the research. So what's happening? Europe, Canada, and yes, China are recruiting the scientists that we are losing. So we are going to pay a big economic price for a long time for what's already happened. So let's stop the digging and try and recover, because this is going to hit our economy in a way that is really terrible, terrible impact. And I thank you for
Well, and you do bring up another point, which is that these foreign students coming to the U.S., when we are making them feel unwelcome, they often pay full freight.
Correct.
Which is really, really helpful to our universities, and all of a sudden, that's an income source that
Well,
they
the
don't
number
have.
of F1 student applications has completely crashed.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we're losing money because they subsidize the American students. And then we're also losing, almost 50% of the Nobel Prize winners who are Americans in the sciences were Americans by choice, Americans born someplace else. Those people are not going to be here in our future.
So it's a talent drain and a financial drain. Thank you. I yield back.
Thanks, Ms. Scanlon. Do my colleagues on my side have any questions? Okay. Well, thank you all very much. Seeing no one else having questions, the panel is excused. Thank you very much for coming. If the next panel we could do, I hope you did this, start down here and move up. Ms. Ansari, Ms. Johnson, Ms. Hayes, Mr. Kassar, Ms. Williams, Mr. Cisneros, Mr. Kurson, and Mr. Takano. Doesn't really matter which seat you sit in. I'll call you by the way you were on this list. Yeah, mark them. No, Miss Hayes. Oh, no, Casara. This is Neros. Miss Ansari, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox and Ranking Member McGovern, for allowing me the opportunity to join today's hearing. First, let me start by saying that the fact that we have been here since the literal middle of the night at a committee markup that will determine the federal government's budget, something that affects every single American, is absurd. But I'm proud of the showing of Democrats in this room, of colleagues who have been here for decades, alongside some colleagues who, like me, have been here for just a couple of months. We hail from different parts of the country, different backgrounds, different ideas on policy, but we stand united against this bill and the process by which it is moving through this committee. I urge you to support my amendment that would strike the text of the bill and replace it with the Stock Act 2.0. This would prevent government officials and their immediate family members from being able to trade individual stocks. The original Stock Act barred members of Congress, the president, vice president, and high-level staff from engaging in insider trading or otherwise using non-public information for their own benefit. It also included important updates to financial transparency by requiring these high-ranking government officials to disclose financial transactions to the public. It is because of this latter provision that we discovered earlier this month that the chairman of the committee with jurisdiction over oil and gas, as well as mining lease sales, bought up to $150,000 in stock throughout the month of March. Those stocks included shares of oil companies like ExxonMobil, Chevron, BP, ConocoPhillips, Suncor, and Canadian Natural Resources. They also included mining companies like BHP, Freeport-McMoRan, and Rio Tinto, for whom the largest shareholder is a Chinese state-owned corporation. These oil and mining stock trades took place while the chairman was writing a major portion of this very bill, the portion that is an unprecedented multi-billion-dollar giveaway to oil and mining companies. Now, so many of these CEOs are set to directly benefit from this partisan budget that makes draconian cuts to the programs on which my constituents and my Republican colleagues' constituents rely on. This is bigger than any one member benefiting from a stock trade. It's about this legislation as a whole, a budget that endorses this kind of behavior, uplifts it, and makes it into real policy that benefits the ultra-rich getting richer over everything else. Let's be clear, this so-called big, beautiful bill is not in the interest of the American people. It includes billions of dollars in cuts from critical programs such as SNAP and Medicaid. Over 7.6 million Americans would lose their health insurance just from these cuts. And that doesn't include the millions of Americans that would lose access to health care when hospitals that rely on Medicaid are forced to shut down, all while giving trillions of dollars in handouts to mega corporations and the ultra-wealthy. And now we also know that at least one member of Congress could personally and directly enrich himself from these provisions. This is corruption, plain and simple. My amendment would strike the text of this bill and replace it with legislation that would prevent this sort of corruption from public officials. This is not a partisan issue, it is common sense. Members of Congress should not be able to use their positions of power for personal financial gain, nor should there be a perception of such. We should not have to rely on the self-restraint of members of Congress to resist the temptation of self-dealing and insider trading. It just should not be allowed. Even Speaker Mike Johnson voiced his support for banning stock trading for members of Congress last week, stating that members of Congress should not, quote, have any appearance of impropriety, end quote. The oil and mining stock trade that happened while the chair was writing this bill to give away unprecedented sums to oil and mining industries most certainly has the appearance of impropriety. I sincerely hope that it is just an appearance. At a time when public trust in Congress is abysmal, we have to work harder to rebuild it. Banning stock trades by members of Congress is the first step. It's the lowest hanging fruit. There is absolutely no reason why Republicans on this committee should oppose this amendment. I urge the committee to make my amendments in order. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Madam Chairman, Ranking Member McGovern. There's so much to talk about in this bill, and I have several amendments, and I want to highlight two of them. But before I do that, I wanted to make some general comments on behalf of the residents of Texas 32 and the great state of Texas. Our deficit is at catastrophic levels. We've had multiple committee hearings in this building that suggest we're going to be facing some very impending financial crisis. Our federal credit rating was just reduced. And this bill and the Republicans in this building are voting to add $4 trillion to the deficit in the most irresponsible way possible, on the backs of hungry children, on the backs of young mothers and families and the poor in this country to keep them from getting health care, on the backs of children and kids who want to get an education in cybersecurity, on the backs of safety of our aviation and our airports, on the backs of FEMA and states for disaster preparedness, on the backs of law enforcement officers who are being routinely terminated, on the backs of woeful areas across this government for lack of prudent and proper investment to the health and safety and the prosperity of this country. And we're being put in a dire financial strait so that the President of the United States can reward a few of his friends with extra money in their bank account that they don't need, that they can't spend. And the Republicans in this Congress have abdicated all the values that they have campaigned on for decades in homage to this one man. And it is a travesty to this government and to the American people that this is happening. Democrats have been protesting this viciously all through the day in the weeks preceding this to have the American people wake up and say, this is harming you. This bill will hurt the American people. I have an amendment for the Affordable Care Act tax credit. Millions of people get their health care in this country because of the Affordable Care Act. Texas is one of the leading states of it. Our state and our health care system is going to be devastated. And this is a bill that is supposed to give tax cuts. But yet we are removing one of the most critical tax cuts that the American people rely on. It makes absolutely no sense. How can we tout the greatest tax cut bill to the American people at the same time we are cutting one of the most important tax cuts that benefits the vast majority of the American people? And I really would like to urge this committee to restore the tax cuts of the Affordable Care Act. Millions and millions of people in the state of Texas and across this land desperately rely on that to get the desperate needs of healthcare. Small businesses, our new entrepreneurs, the young people who don't work for big corporations with vast amounts of employees to have diversity of risk. They rely on the Affordable Care Act. And health insurance is already one of the leading expenses of a family in this country, and it is prohibitively expensive. And this initiative, the Affordable Care Act, and these tax credits make it possible. The other amendment I would like to address for this committee is to restore funding to FEMA. I sit on the Homeland Security Committee. I've heard so much testimony about the urgent need and the critical role that FEMA plays as the backstop for states and American families when nature and the disaster strike out of the blue without ability to prepare. It's the safety net that is so critically relied on by so many. our country will be at an peril on our national security, on our preparedness, if we don't have FEMA to come in and put the pieces back together. To just today, horrible tornadoes ripped through Alabama. I mean, no state is free from natural disaster. And Texas is certainly one of the states that has had to rely on FEMA the most. Hurricane Harvey decimated our Gulf Coast. Tornadoes decimate North Texas. We're the 6th largest economy in the world, the state of Texas. And without FEMA, we will be so burdened in putting our country back together that the federal government will also be harmed. I appreciate the consideration for this committee, and I strongly encourage you to adopt my amendments and make them in order. And with that, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Ms. Hayes, you're recognized.
Thank you. Hungry kids don't learn. This issue has always been important to me. Unless and until you've come into your classroom on a Monday morning and seen a kid with their head down, knowing that they haven't had a decent meal since they left, you can't understand. Unless and until you find yourself automatically packing a second piece of fruit in your lunch because you expect that one of your students is going to ask you for it, you can't understand. It changes you. It does something to you. When I came to Congress, I knew I would work to help address food insecurity. But my Republican colleagues here in this bill seek to exacerbate it. Hunger is a policy choice, and today we're considering legislation that makes the choice to take food away from people, from children. The reconciliation bill we are considering here today is the largest ever cut to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Approximately $313 billion will be taken away from the most vulnerable in our country: hungry children, families, veterans, and seniors. Republicans are pushing a legislative package that guts SNAP, the most efficient and effective anti-poverty program in this nation. The cost-sharing provisions in this legislation are going to shift the financial burden to states, forcing the states to cut benefits, eligibility, or both in order to reduce costs. States have always been responsible for hiring staff and administering the benefits they receive through the federal government and paying an equal share with the federal government. Under this bill, a workforce already facing shortages would have more responsibility to address paperwork errors with fewer funds. This bill does nothing to support workforce development or the administrative support that will come as a result of these changes. In my state of Connecticut, the Department of Social Services estimates that this would cost an additional $177 million per year. But based on the FY23 error rates, the state of New York, which would be forced to pay $1.8 billion, Texas, $1.074 billion, Georgia, $82 million, and North Carolina, $584 million in additional costs to administer these programs. Additionally, this legislation would prevent the Secretary of Agriculture from reevaluating the Thrifty Food Plan, which is used to determine benefit eligibility amounts. This bill also expands work requirements for older adults up to age 65 and for parents in households with children age 7 or older, which means that 4 million children between the ages of 7 and 17 who live in households that receive SNAP would be at risk of losing some type of food assistance. While expanding these requirements, this legislation does nothing, once again, to fund workforce development programs or increase access to child care for these families. I would also note that when children lose their SNAP benefits, they automatically lose their CEP, which is the community eligibility provision that allows them to get free and reduced lunch at school. So not only is food being taken away from children at home, it is being taken away from them at school. My amendment is simple. It prevents any cuts to SNAP that would reduce benefits for the 42 million Americans who rely on the program for food assistance. My amendment says that this legislation can only take effect once the USDA and all state agencies issue reports evaluating and certifying that any changes made to SNAP would not result in a reduction of benefits to eligible individuals or decrease in population. SNAP serves 16 million children, 8 million seniors, and 4 million people with disabilities. I've heard over and over and over that the target is able-bodied adults without dependents who have the ability to work. If that is true, and that is the only group you are targeting, then it should be simple to make sure that we are protecting children and families and seniors and those with disabilities from being cut off of these programs. I can't understand why my Republican colleagues would not vote for that. Based on your testimony and everything that you've said in regards to SNAP, these aren't the people you're going after anyway. So we should all work together to ensure that we protect them. I've heard members from the other side of the aisle say that their intention is not to cut benefits. This amendment is your chance to go on the record and do just that. While I question the intent here and where we are going, I understand with fidelity the outcome and who will be affected. In the wealthiest nation in the world, we have the ability to feed children. We don't have a drought, we don't have a famine, we don't have a war. We have policies that intend to take food out of the mouths of children. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Thank you, Ms. Hayes. Mr. Kassar, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. So in this terrible Republican budget bill, we're talking about saving money by cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. But then when we actually look at the bill about who's taking a cut, well, of course, we are cutting taxes for billionaires, but the people who are taking a cut is a person with a disability who will lose their health care because we say, well, you've got a disability, but it's not quite bad enough, or you didn't fill out this piece of paper. Or we're cutting the $6 a day in food assistance to a child because now you're 8 years old, not 7 years old, so you don't need it anymore. You kidding me? When folks think about waste, fraud, and abuse, we aren't talking about these Americans. If you want to see waste, tens of billions of dollars get milked by big pharma every year off of the taxpayer and the Medicare Advantage program. We could be getting tens of billions of dollars from them. Or if you want to talk about fraud, we could be talking about the billionaires who hide their money in offshore accounts that we should be going after. Or if you want to talk about abuse, this bill that's supposed to be saving money has $25 billion in it for Trump's Golden Dome project. That recently was reported, the person most likely to get that money is Elon Musk. So while he's in the White House playing with the president, this bill is sending potentially $25 billion to Elon Musk. When we talk about waste, fraud, and abuse, we should be looking at those folks with lots of power who are milking the taxpayers, not the biggest Medicare cut in American history or the biggest Medicaid cut in American history. So come on, y'all. So one of the amendments I've proposed is pretty simple. Let's say if a federal court finds that Elon Musk abused his power to be able to route money to himself, then we could save ourselves billions of dollars by automatically canceling out these billionaire tax cuts and the billions of dollars in contracts that Elon Musk has. If nobody on this panel thinks that Elon Musk hasn't been abusing his power, then we could just put this amendment in order and take it to a vote. If Elon Musk is found to have abused his power, we can save ourselves a whole bunch of money. And as if that isn't enough of the heart of the hypocrisy here, the Republican Party that campaigned on saving people money, one, is talking about saving billionaires money with their tax cut, and two, in this bill, they're going to jack up the premiums on health care for the people that rely on the marketplace for their health care. And so I will hand the mic over, yield my time to any of my Republican colleagues that want to address the amount of money that their tax-paying citizens are going to have to pay in increased premiums for their health care. If anybody wants to mention, we have the numbers, everybody here has the numbers, how much your constituents are going to have to pay more every year in health care because of this bill. I don't know the numbers for my district. It's going to be a 50% increase, over $400 in my district. And that's actually not even close to how much in many of the Republican districts there's going to be an increase. I would yield the mic.
I think we're 78% in my district.
78% in Mr. McGovern's district. Maybe none of the Republican members want to mention it, but the Republican gentleman from New York, there would be a 44% increase, $2,000 a year hit to his constituents in their health care costs. The distinguished gentleman from Virginia, his constituents would face an increase in $770 a year in their health care premiums. The distinguished Republican chairwoman of this committee, a 60% increase in health care premiums, and that's on average. The distinguished Republican congresswoman here from Minnesota was recently told here by the committee on the budget that a 60-year-old couple with a joint income of $85,000 a year in her district would see an $11,000 a year increase in their costs while we're giving tax cuts to billionaires. And what bothers me the most is that we want to hide it. Nobody wants here to talk about the fact that they're jacking up insurance costs on their own constituents while giving a billionaire a tax break. Nobody on the Republican side pushing this bill wants to have an in-person town hall and look their constituents in the face and explain to them why they want to hand Elon Musk another $25 billion contract while jacking up your health insurance costs, not just by hundreds, but by thousands of dollars. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Kassar. Ms. Williams, you're recognized for 5
Thank you,
minutes.
Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member McGovern. Y'all, this meeting started at 1 a.m. and has been going through the entire night, morning, and now day. We're considering one of the most harmful bills to ever come before the House, cutting health care from 14 million Americans, taking food from the mouths of hungry children, seniors, and veterans. My Republican colleagues were hoping that my Democratic colleagues and I would sleep through the night as the American people slept. But what's done in the dark, y'all, comes to the light, and I'm here to shed the light. That's why I stayed up all night, and that's why I'm here right now as the voice of Georgia's fighting 5th Congressional District. I follow in the footsteps of the late Congressman John Lewis, known as the conscience of the Congress. And if there's anything Republicans need more of these days, it's a conscience. Because who with a conscience would rip health care away from 14 million people in this country? Who with a conscience would make the largest cut in history to food benefits for children, seniors, veterans, and people with disabilities? Who with a conscience would add $5 trillion to the deficit with nothing to show for it but billionaire tax cuts? No one with a conscience would do any of that, but that's exactly what this Republican so-called one big beautiful bill would do. Congressman John Lewis would be ashamed of y'all. I know that I am. But you know what? He'd be proud of his Democratic colleagues for making the good trouble by unleashing that on behalf of the American people. House Democrats wrote 537 amendments to your so-called one big beautiful bill. Just because Republicans aren't willing to change their bill to actually help the American people, it definitely won't stop us from offering these amendments because we know that it doesn't have to be this way. I have 16 amendments myself. One, to invest in programs to increase our housing supply and lower housing costs. Another, to stop taxpayer funding for anti-abortion clinics that spread disinformation about women's health care. Another, to stop Trump from cutting essential federal workers without at least getting a report from Congress on how it'll harm government services. Another, to stop Trump from profiting off funding for presidential security. An additional one, to increase nutrition benefits and eligibility for students. Another, to require reports on how the policies in this bill affect low-income individuals and racial inequities. Another, to stop January 6th insurrectionists from getting a settlement from the federal government for their crimes. And yet another, to ensure that members of Congress can continue conducting lawful oversight in ICE facilities. Another one, to make maternal medical care, menstrual products, and broadband costs covered expenses for determining people's eligibility for food assistance. Another, to stop Elon Musk from selling the federal government AI systems while he's employed by our federal government. And yet another, to stop any funds in this bill from being used to unconstitutionally remove a United States citizen from this country. Another, to require the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to remain independent of whoever is president, Democratic or Republican. and yet another to keep the funding for sustainable aviation fuel, which supports our aviation industry to be cleaner and more environmentally friendly. If my Republican colleagues really want to do right by the American people, you'd approve all of these amendments. I can't fix everything in this horrible bill, even with the 16 amendments that I'm offering, but these would definitely be a start. And next time, maybe open up this big, beautiful bill to some big, beautiful debate in the light of day, because it doesn't matter what your ideas are if you can't defend them in broad daylight for the American people. You must be hiding something from the American people. The children, seniors, and veterans in my district that will lose health care and SNAP benefits, y'all, they are more than a line item in a budget. They are real people simply trying to survive. So don't turn your back on them to give tax cuts to billionaires. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Mr. Cisneros, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member McGovern, and members of the Rules Committee. I am deeply disappointed with how this hearing came about. The majority scheduled a hearing in the middle of the night to further their agenda without debate or scrutiny. But the timing of the hearing cannot hide the fact this legislation rips off the American people. It increases tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans, paid for by nearly $700 billion in cuts to Medicaid and $267 billion cuts to SNAP. I'm here to offer 4 amendments to this flawed legislation and urge the committee to make them in order. My first amendment seeks to ensure Congress is authorizing the funds needed to pay our child care workers and maintain our modernized and the facilities where they work in the Department of Defense. My amendment would increase child care fee assistance to $200 million, add $1.3 billion for Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and Space Force Child Development Center facility maintenance, and include $1 billion for child care provider compensation under the Department of Defense's modernization of the Child Development Program staffing model passed in the fiscal year 25 NDAA. I want to be clear, my amendment does not raise the top line. Instead, it will take from an expensive and unnecessary program and instead support our service members' family needs. My next amendment seeks to reassert congressional oversight into the activities of the Department of Defense. My amendment allows the department to access the first $100 billion of the bill's funding, but before the department can use the last $50 billion, it simply requires the department to answer some elementary oversight questions about DOGE and the Department of Defense. I support better efficiency and program management at the Pentagon, as I know many of my colleagues do. I've been proud to support numerous efforts to that effect, and I look forward to working with my colleagues in a bipartisan way in the future, but that's not what this bill is. Our responsibility is to conduct oversight, and so far, our questions to the department have yielded insubstantial or non-existent answers, and the administration seems unable to explain the role of DOGE in the Department of Defense. I know the DoD is capable of giving thoughtful responses. I have sat in the witness seat before and have answered questions, and I've been required to reply to congressional inquiries, which I gladly did because that was my responsibility. At the very least, we should understand what this unauthorized department is doing to one of the departments that we are supposed to be overseeing in Congress. My third amendment seeks to expand eligibility for the employer-provide child care tax credit. This amendment would define small business concern in accordance with the Small Business Act for the purpose of the employer-provided child care tax credit. This would help small businesses attract and retain employees that are working parents. My final amendment seeks to revise the short title of the bill to the One Big Billionaire Bailout Act. Raising a child, owning a small business, having access to affordable and quality health care in this economy, it's becoming more difficult with the rising cost of living. Again, this bill, instead of helping hardworking Americans nationwide, gives a government handout to billionaires and the wealthiest Americans at the expense of everyone else. The name matters because it tells the truth of what this fine print hides. I am happy to tell the American people who this bill really serves, because it is not them. Again, I urge you to make these amendments in order. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any of your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cisneros. Mr. Chicano, I'll go to you next.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Let's begin with the obvious. This bill, the so-called budget reconciliation package, is not even finished. Republican leadership is asking members to vote on a moving target with text still changing and details still unclear. Even Republican members don't know what's in it, but they're being told to rush this to the floor before the holiday weekend so they can hand Donald Trump a political win. Trump has made his demand clear. Unite behind what is possibly the most budget-busting piece of legislation in modern U.S. history. And now, Republicans are stuck between their talking point of deficit reduction and their obligation to do whatever Donald Trump tells them to do. Last night, the Congressional Budget Office released its score. It found that this bill would increase the deficit by $2.3 trillion over the next decade. Let me say that again, $2.3 trillion. That would trigger automatic cuts to Medicare and other vital programs unless Congress steps in. And who benefits? According to the CBO, the richest 10% of Americans would see their incomes go up, while the poorest 10% would see theirs go down. So yes, this bill deserves a name, and I would call it One Big Billionaire Payout. And while billionaires and corporations are poised to win big, the people I serve, veterans, students, and working families are set to lose. I'm offering 10 amendments to stop the worst of this damage. First, I've introduced an amendment to exempt disabled veterans from new Medicaid work requirements. Now, not all veterans are eligible to receive their health care from VA, and currently 1.6 million veterans rely on Medicaid. This bill would subject as many as 1 million of them to bureaucratic red tape just to keep their health care. Many veterans with service-connected disabilities fall below the disability rating that makes them eligible for VA care and significant barriers to employment. Punishing them for that is not reform, it's cruelty. Now, second, if you're going to rip away veterans' health care, the least you can do is tell them. My amendment would require CMS to notify veterans who are losing Medicaid coverage. Third, I've offered a similar amendment requiring USDA to notify veterans and service members if they're kicked off SNAP. Over 1 million veterans rely on food assistance, and this bill, again, takes from those who served and gives to those who stockpile wealth without sacrifice. Fourth and fifth, I propose creating websites through HHS and USDA to help veterans navigate the fallout, healthcare and nutrition resources for those losing coverage. It's a modest effort to clean up the mess this bill creates. Sixth, I'm offering an amendment to preserve nursing home staffing reforms. In 2024, CMS finalized a rule to address dangerous understaffing. This bill delays that and could cost lives. University of Pennsylvania research estimates 13,000 lives would be saved annually under that rule. Who exactly are we protecting by delaying that? Certainly not the seniors living in those homes. My seventh amendment strikes the repeal of the 2023 Borrower Defense Rule, a protection for student borrowers defrauded by predatory colleges. In just 1 year, over 770,000 students filed claims. This bill would make it nearly impossible for future victims to get relief. Eighth, I strike the repeal of the 90-10 rule fix, a bipartisan protection that keeps for-profit colleges from targeting veterans as dollar signs. Without it, GI Bill recipients become cash cows for worthless diploma mills, and taxpayers foot the bill when these shady schools collapse. Ninth, I proposed a Certify No Harm amendment, which would simply require federal agencies to confirm that these provisions won't increase fraud against student veterans before they take effect. If Republicans are so confident this bill won't hurt anyone, this should be an easy yes. And finally, my 10th amendment includes the Protect Students Act, codifying essential safeguards against deceptive marketing, inflated job placement claims, and outright fraud by for-profit colleges and loan servicers. And let me close by reminding my colleagues that this isn't some routine budget bill. This is reverse Robin Hood. It steals health care from veterans, it steals food from hungry families, it steals loan protections from students, and it steals safety from nursing home residents. And it does all that to give billionaires a payday with a price tag of $2.3 trillion in new debt. This isn't about values, it's about vanity, trying to give a twice-impeached former president a talking point for his next rally. I urge my colleagues to support these amendments and reject this sham of a bill. And I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Takano. Mr. Carson.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member. Thank you for providing me the time to testify this afternoon. I have 4 amendments to this reconciliation bill. My amendments protect Medicaid, passenger rail, our environment, and would protect the middle class. I first want to speak on Amendment 428 to conduct a comprehensive audit within 180 days to assess the impact of this bill's impact on income inequality in our country. The GOP claims their tax policies will benefit the middle class. I say prove it. Prove to the American people that the tax policies in this bill will help the middle class, not the ultra-wealthy. Next, my Amendment 168 addresses one of the most urgent, life-threatening issues in this bill, which is that this bill would slash health care for 14 million Americans. Just this afternoon, an Indianapolis woman named Joan contacted our office. She is about to turn 65, she's disabled, and she receives Medicaid to survive. She told me, at 65 years old, I have nowhere else to go, and I don't want to lose my home, and I don't want to lose my health care. Yesterday evening, I spoke on the House floor about 3 women from my district in Indy, Erica, Bethany, and Carol Ann, who rely on SNAP and Medicaid to survive. These are just 3 of the thousands of people who have reached out to us in the past few weeks. We receive messages from folks every day who are afraid for themselves, but they're also terrified for their children, other people's children, their family members, other people's family members. That's because Indianapolis is a community that cares about one another. We look out for one another. It's what we do. It's who we are. I've always been proud of my hometown, but I'm even more proud of hearing the groundswell of support, especially over the last week, from those in Indianapolis who have overwhelmingly told me we must help our neighbors and we must protect Medicaid. I'm here today to fight for the people of Indianapolis who deserve a government that stands with them, not billionaires. This past week, our country has watched members of Congress debate essentially who deserves to live and who deserves to die in our country. For 14 million Americans, health care and Medicaid cuts aren't a political discussion. They are a matter of life and death. 14 million Americans would lose health care under this current bill. That includes newborns, children, seniors, and postpartum mothers, the most vulnerable among us. We've also watched Republican members of Congress deny that this bill will slash Medicaid, even though a nonpartisan analysis found that the Republican budget simply would not be possible without cutting Medicaid and essential health care. And yet, many of my colleagues still deny that this budget will drastically cut essential health care. So, my message to my colleagues is, prove it. If you insist your bill will not hurt Medicaid, if you insist this bill will not snatch health care out of the hands of 14 million men, women, and children, prove it by simply passing my amendment. My amendment would ensure none of the provisions of this bill will take effect if there is an increase in mortality rates due to reduced access to health care services as a result of this bill. If Republicans truly believe this bill is not taking money away from Medicaid to give tax breaks to billionaires, then they should have no problem passing this amendment. If Republicans believe that at a minimum, we should make sure this bill does not cause Americans to die, then they shouldn't have a problem passing my amendment. I would like to close my remarks, Madam Chair and Ranking Member, by reminding us again of Joan, Erica, Bethany, and Carol Ann in the great Hoosier State. I implore you to remember their humanity. 14 million people who stand to lose their health care are relying on us to do the right thing. Protect Medicaid, protect health care, protect our children. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Carson. Does anyone on my side wish to ask any questions? Mr. Scott, Mr. Griffith? Okay. Mr. McGovern, you're recognized.
Yeah, no, again, I want to thank everybody here for being in the fight. There's too much at stake. I mean, you highlighted many of the concerns that have been echoed over and over again today. I mean, Johanna Hayes and I were on the Ag Committee when they marked up the Ag section of this reconciliation bill, and it was maddening. And not just because of the impact of the cuts on children, on vulnerable people, on senior citizens, on veterans, on people with disabilities, but this kind of indifference, like it's no big deal. And it is a big deal. It is a big deal. If you can't put food on the table for your kids, that's a huge deal. That's every parent's worst nightmare. You know, if you're a senior citizen, not being able to afford your medication and your food, that's a big deal. And you know, a lot of the issues that were raised by this panel, you know, point to the fact that it seems that the people who are going to suffer the most are the most vulnerable, and the people who are well off and well connected and have the most are going to get even more. And so, again, I thank you for staying. Some of you have been here like since 1 o'clock in the morning. Some, I've seen you in the hallways at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you know, and so you've been around. And but I really do think it's important that people speak up. And Ms. Hayes.
I just want to say that, thank you for that, but as many of you know, I spent my career as a classroom teacher, and when you're on the other side of these processes and you're in a building with children and not really understanding how these policy decisions are being made, everything from protecting them from gun violence to mental health and wraparound services to something as basic as food. You know, understanding that federal law prohibited the lunch lady from even giving students a sandwich at the end of the day, and instead she had to throw it away. It is heartbreaking. So then to get here and be faced with the realization that there are people who understand what these policies do and still support them. These are not oversights. These are not loopholes. These are policy choices and intentional decisions that are being made. Right now, we are debating legislation once again. I mean, I saw it in the debt ceiling negotiations, in the CR, in every budget every year, and now in reconciliation, where we move from hypotheticals to reduce food benefits that directly impact children. And it's something